So we're joined here tonight with mental health experts Pat Capel and Hannah Jackson, both registered psychotherapists and members of the Human Givens Institute.
Yes, fantastic. Welcome, Pat and Hannah, who are colleagues of mine as well.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us. So Pat has a background in teaching and has a special interest in teens and the issues they face in the classroom. Pat has also worked with a wide range of adults, most commonly in the areas of stress, anxiety, depression and trauma. And Hannah Jackson is a facilitator and trainer. Hannah's work covers a wide range of client issues, but she's particularly interested in working with clients wanting to recover from post-traumatic stress disorder, whether as a result of critical incident, military service or childhood trauma. She also enjoys working with clients looking for greater and lasting self-confidence and self-esteem. Fantastic.
Okay, so let's start this discussion with the first question. So, what would you say are the most prevalent mental health issues we're seeing today?
I'll start?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that the thing to start with is that we need to understand, firstly, that we all have emotional needs. And when those needs don't get met in a really healthy, fulfilling way, that is when we are at risk of mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
And in our particular climate, with this rather bizarre lockdown situation, some of those needs are simply not being met at all. So we're struggling to have meaningful interaction with other people. We're struggling to feel that we have a sense of autonomy and control. Some of us are lacking security. We don't know, is our job going to be there in a week's time?
Mm-hmm.
So all of those things put together at this time obviously make things a little more problematic for some of us. And, you know, no two of us are the same. So you might find the situation quite easy to cope with. I might not, and vice versa. So, you know, there's no sort of hard and fast rule. But if we look at those particular needs and what's not being met, that is going to result in some form of, not necessarily mental illness, but a mental health issue.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Pat, can you actually tell me what causes depression?
Well, not getting those needs met, for one thing.
Yeah.
But anything that goes wrong for you can result in you feeling not just down in the dumps, but a feeling of long-term emptiness, darkness, no way out of it. So whether there's a set cause for it depends entirely on the individual, but it could just be a sign of something isn't quite right. And then when you get stuck into that circle and that cycle of depression, it can be really difficult to get out of it.
And do you have any advice that, like, how can people help themselves if they have depression?
One of the things to look at is to look at all those essential emotional needs. So your need for control, your need to feel secure, your need for meaning and purpose, and do, if you like, a little sort of checklist. You know, how am I getting those needs met at the moment and in a healthy way? And sometimes just tweaking one or two of those is enough to actually start getting you out of that place, that place of depression, and making little decisions. So if you can set little goals around, you know, I want to be a little bit more in control of things, so set a little goal around that, or be in control of what you can be in control of. Or how can I feel a little bit more secure? You know, is that a case of, you know, phoning my bank manager to make, you know, to talk to him about my finances, or is it, you know, looking at, you know, my house situation or my personal situation?
It's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because people are so sort of familiar with their physical needs, but they're not as familiar with their emotional needs, and you know, they can sort of meet them unwittingly almost, and sometimes in an unhealthy way. And when they're educated to know what their emotional needs are, and actually, you know, if you're depressed and you're on a worry cycle and not getting enough sleep, you're not enough slow wave sleep, and you're in this sort of cycle because you're not solving any of the issues. So that education, I think, around emotional needs is so valuable. And when people get the sense, as you were saying, Hannah, that actually what are the small things they can do that will actually start to meet them. It's a huge benefit. But the other interesting, go on. So you're going to say something?
No, I was just going to say, I think it's a real issue at the moment, particularly with the need for being socially connected to our families and our wider friendship groups. We're not getting that at the moment, so we're all really struggling with that aspect of things, not being able to just pop out and go and see somebody or give somebody a hug, and that can make us, even if one of those emotional needs is not being met, that can make us feel low.
And I think also at the moment, with so many of us on our own or feeling isolated, that is when our imagination can sometimes really take over. And
not in a good way.
And not in a good way. So the imagination starts seeing things and that are not there, that are simply not real and not part of who and what we are. But because we've got ourselves into a bit of a cycle, that misuse of our imagination starts that whole, the world's rubbish and I'm rubbish and nothing's going to get any better. And, once we realize we're in that cycle, we need to find a way to stop it. And we need to find a way to chip into it so that we can stand back and have a much more objective look at what is happening around us and how we are responding to what is happening around us.
I think that's a really key bit that you just said there, Pat, about responding. Sometimes it can be almost a conditioned response to challenges of life. What do you think, Hannah?
I also think that can then have an impact on our sleep. And if we're not sleeping properly, as you mentioned, Lee, if we're not sleeping properly, we're not getting that restorative sleep, that slow wave, restorative physical repair sleep. And then that just sets up that cycle even more.
And there's been so much in the press recently about how, over the last few months, how many people are saying that their sleeping patterns are not what they should be, that they know they're either getting too much sleep or they're not getting enough, or they're out of their routines, they're waking up at ungodly hours of the morning, can't get back to sleep. And, there are ways to fix that, and there are ways to remedy the situation. But also, as we all know, we're in this rather weird time at the moment. It's not going to last forever. We don't know how long it will last for, but it won't last forever. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. We just don't know how long the tunnel is at the moment.
I think the other thing, Lis, I think is really interesting, and is that depression is also often thought of as being something which is where someone's they're obviously in a low mood, but it's actually a state of very high emotional arousal. So it doesn't look like what it actually is.
Correct.
So you're very much in your emotional brain, catastrophizing, like you were saying, Pat. But that's often misunderstood, that part, I think, is the other.
It's an exhausting condition.
So how do you calm that?
Well, we've got a very simple technique, which involves breathing. That we call 7-11 breathing, and anyone can go and look that up, and it's really easy to learn. And the principle behind it being breathing out is going to calm you down, and once you calm down and you give your emotional brain a break so that the logical rational brain can kick in, the world does suddenly look very, very different. But it is calming that heightened emotional arousal down, and by a simple act of spending a few minutes every day breathing and breathing properly makes a massive difference.
Especially if you're doing it when you're feeling okay-ish, and then your body gets into that recognition of that state, that relaxation state. And then if you are in a panic or feeling anxious, you can then employ it, and your body will recognize that it's calming itself down.
And so when's the best time to do a 7-11 breath? Would it be like in the morning when you wake up, or would it help sleep as well?
I tell my clients to do it whenever they can. It's something you can, I always say start and finish the day with it. Absolutely. And then, under normal circumstances, when you're walking down the street, use your steps as the count. In for 5 steps, out for 8, and eventually build up to in for 7 and out for 11. But because the more times you do it, the better you become at it, and the quicker your mind and your body will calm down. So, a lot of people struggle the first few times they do it. Well, that's normal. So don't beat yourself up if you don't get to 7 counts and 11 counts first time round. It doesn't matter. long as you're breathing out more than breathing in, and working up to 7 and 11, but practice, practice, practice. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it work, like, you know, so quickly, just teaching somebody how to do that breathing, and you know, they came into the treatment room in a complete state and left, you know, smiling and happy. It was incredible, the incredible transformation. And so, but it's that simple.
You can see it in their bodies.
Yeah.
You can physically see the difference in their facial expression, their skin tone, the shoulders. You can see it working. And I think it is something which all of us should be doing on a regular basis.
So how long would you do it for? Say, if you did it in the morning, would you do it for like 2 minutes or 3 minutes?
You can do like 10 rounds. I encourage people to do sort of 10 rounds of it as a starter.
Yeah.
As long as you like. The longer the better sometimes. I mean, at nighttime,
helps you to sleep.
At nighttime, you'll fall asleep doing it. Especially if you then include some really good muscle relaxation with it. It will knock you out.
Yeah. And it will give you a better night's sleep, so you sleep until
much better. Yeah.
Okay. So we're hearing a lot about trauma at the moment. Can you explain what trauma is and how this can impact on somebody's life, please?
So trauma is an experience of a deeply distressing or frightening incident. So if we can, you know, look at what's happened recently, that is deeply distressing and frightening with coronavirus, because it's an unknown, it's a danger, we can't see it. So that in itself could be traumatizing. You know, it is a trauma, and it could lead on to us, you know, frightening ourselves, and that then being stored in what's known as our fight or flight system. And really that's the body looking after itself really, really well. That's what I often tell my clients, you know, your body's been looking up. Your body is looking after itself, but maybe it's like a smoke alarm going off if you burn the toast. It's not a real fire, but the smoke alarm keeps going off. And that's when it leads into more sort of complicated situations.
So Hannah, because I know that there could be, like, you've treated people, we met at actually PTSD resolution, where I know you did a talk, which I was absolutely enthralled by, and you were dealing with sort of quite complex layers of trauma as well. And how would that relate to, say, someone who is just really overreacting or finds they're very reactive in a situation, almost like a sub kind of trauma? So are there different layers of it, if you know what I mean?
There are, and you can get something sort of called complex post-traumatic stress, which is sort of layer upon layer of trauma. And what I usually find with military personnel that I work with is that they've been traumatized in their childhood. So it's more likely that when they actually come across other really frightening, distressing incidents, that they're more easily traumatized. So it's that layer upon layer upon layer. So usually the soldiers that I work with have had some degree of childhood trauma as well.
How do you know you've had a trauma?
So we probably all will go through something traumatic in our lives, but it's whether our bodies process that event and it gets filed into our memory bank, or whether it stays in our security system, in our fight or flight system.
Right.
Because the body is looking after itself so well, it will then try to protect us as much as it can. And it's not a very subtle or discerning system. It will just pattern match in the environment anything that looks vaguely similar. So if you're working with a soldier and you know, and he's not been in a war for many years, but a car backfires, suddenly he or she can be back in the battlefield. But that's the same with any trauma. You might get flashbacks, you might get very sort of detached. You might have day nightmares. That's not the right word, but
So it sort of plays out as a feeling, because someone might intellectually know that was a time long ago, but it's still playing out in their feelings throughout the day or night, or on different levels.
It can play out in feelings, but also in bodily sensations.
Yes.
in many different ways. Yeah, or some, you know, something can trigger you off, and it's completely unrelated to what you actually went through. And one of the ways to recover from, you know, if we do go through traumatic time, is to really self-soothe and to rest and relax deeply. But sometimes that's not possible, you know, for people in emergency services. You know, they'll see a trauma upon trauma upon trauma, and that makes you more susceptible to developing more complications, such as post-traumatic stress.
So it's
probably
sorry. Go on,
I was going to say, I just really want to emphasize that it's not a disorder. It doesn't, you know, it's not a disease. It's so much stress and so much pressure piled on. And if you can relax somebody deeply, if you can teach them 7-11 breathing, if you can treat, you know, how they took the information in of the trauma, then that recovery is possible. And that's the fantastic thing.
Yeah.
You know, there is hope. There's always hope there. No matter how low it was, or how terrible the trauma was, what they saw, what they witnessed. And it doesn't have to be whether it's a threat to themselves. It could have been there was a threat to somebody else that they were with, and they were stuck in this situation.
So when they're sort of helpless, when they're stuck in a situation, they feel they can't help themselves.
Yeah.
And that's when they're...
Or can't get away.
Can't get away, yeah. So they can't fight or flee.
Yeah. You think of a small child stuck in, you know, and with parents that are doing horrible things to them. They can't get away, you know. And then it's all confusing. The layer upon that is it's confusing, because the caregiver should be giving them love and attention and care, but they're not. They're treating them badly.
And would you say those situations, Hannah, are the most complex when it goes right back to your primary caregivers like that?
That's probably what would constitute complex PTSD. Yeah. But it's still treatable, and it's still possible to look at that and to recover. Yeah.
And so do you think, and sort of with depression and anxiety, which is sort of quite prevalent, that traumas can be underlying with those as well? So they're showing up as depression, they're showing up as anxiety.
Very often.
Yeah. And so you would track it back. How?
You have to do detective work, don't you think? You just have a lot of asking questions, and sometimes people don't remember, you know, that their way of dealing with it would be that they pushed it right to the back of their mind, so they don't even remember. And again, that's a supporting mechanism of the body. That's a protective mechanism. You don't even remember what happened to you. And slowly, as you peel away the layers of the onion, then you can usually get to the source of it. So that's why, it's just such a great thing to be able to do for somebody, to do this excavation, if you like, and find out really where it all started.
How did the triggers affect the nervous system and that stress?
The way I often explain it is, if we see ourselves kind of on a ladder, and right at the top of the ladder is sort of our ultimate functioning, where we are engaging in a meaningful way with fellow human beings. We can solve problems. We see difficulties, we don't get freaked out by them, we see them as a challenge, and we can work with them, and we work with our environment, particularly with other people. Now that's when we're functioning right at the top. Then Hannah was mentioning the fight or flight system. Now that is, if we perceive what we think is a danger, the body goes into, I'm either going to stand up and fight like hell and protect myself, or I'm going to run like hell and get out of here. So it's all about protecting. But then we go down another level. So again, what Hannah was mentioning, where very often the client doesn't even remember certain things. We go into another state, which is the shutdown state, where the ultimate protection is, I'm just going to forget about this. So, you know, we often hear, I mean, there's this wonderful program on Netflix, I can't remember the name now, about a young woman who was raped, and how they keep saying that she's an unreliable witness. Well, of course she is, because she doesn't remember everything. Because if she remembered everything, just how traumatized would that poor woman be?
Yeah.
So she knows what happened, but she doesn't remember the details because the body has protected her by shutting down. Now, all of us go through those 3 stages on a daily basis. If you, in your car driving and somebody, you know, cuts in front of you and you are speechless with rage, you've dropped right down to the bottom rung. But you come out of that really quickly again. So the trigger will send you down a level on the ladder. And that is the body reacting to threat, or what it perceives as a threat. And when we get stuck in one of those levels, or the lower 2, it's potentially really dangerous for us, because the fight or flight, that's kind of the person who's really badly depressed. They're stuck at that level where they're just going round and round and round the same thing, and they can't find a way for meaningful engagement with their environment. So what we've got to do is try and help them get out of that and move up a level.
I think it's worth mentioning, though, that the treatment doesn't have to be difficult. You know, you don't have to dredge up all the details. Us as therapists, we don't need to know all the details. We just need to know a sort of rough timeline, because the more that you would go over the details, as Pat was saying, the more you get emotionally aroused and bring it all up again. And we don't need to do that in treatment, which is the good news.
Yeah,
really good news.
Do you think that's quite unusual to this particular approach?
Yeah.
I mean, the reason I came to Human Givens was that I reached a point in my life when I needed to just face up to something that had happened in my past. But I just did not want to go and have to tell the person that I was the therapist every single detail all over again, which I'd already done in the past, a few years back. And so it was a huge revelation to me that a Human Givens counsellor didn't need to know all of those details. He could just tell that I was emotionally aroused, that something had happened, there was some sort of trauma, because we've been trained to identify those things. And then the process was very very simple and non-invasive, which is the incredible beauty of it.
Yeah, it's very gentle.
Yeah, it's sort of non-voyeuristic, isn't it? Is the thing. And interestingly, I've had people in the past who will come and they'll sort of say they would have had very long-term therapy. Like a friend of mine actually had a therapist for 10 years, which is a long time to be in therapy, I think, whereas it's nice that it can be a bridge to just getting you to where you need to be, not something that you're in indefinitely.
Yeah.
You agree?
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a long and painful process. It's
absolutely.
How do you know when somebody's come out of the trauma?
Oh, that's an interesting question, isn't it?
You can tell. You usually can tell that they're more relaxed. They'll come and say, "I've slept. I've had the best night's sleep I've ever had. For years and years and years. The nightmares have gone. They're not in that startle response all the time. They're not hyper
quite dramatic,
alert.
isn't it? Yeah.
The eyes are more still.
Yeah.
They have to be like that for a certain amount of months before you. Week, days.
Yeah.
See it one day.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what you often do, Lis, is you when you've got someone who you think might have had a traumatic episode, if you're sort of working it back to a place where they were fine at one point and all of a sudden they're not, and they're behaving in this different way, if you can link it back to something like a trauma and you just get them to scale it, the intensity of feeling and they have now, even though the event might have been 5 years ago, does it feel like it happened yesterday? Is the feeling really intense? Because usually people, when they process it as a narrative around the story of what happened and it's in context, then it feels a bit more distant, whereas the trauma feels like a very loud, in the now kind of intense feeling. Would you agree, Pat?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And also, often you can just ask them, are you feeling any better? And the answer is, yeah. They feel it usually really quickly. And they'll say things like they just feel so much lighter, physically lighter.
And can it come back again? in like a year or 2 years or in the future? Or does that not?
No, that's usually because if that happens, which doesn't happen very often, is that somebody will re-traumatize themselves, or something might happen that reminds them of something. But again, you just go through the same process, and you can clear that again, and you can file away that incident into the memory bank.
Yeah, really interesting.
Absolutely. Just looking at some questions.
Any questions?
A little bit of time, Lis. I
was just wondering, actually, Lee, if you could talk about Glimmers a little bit more in depth, because that's what's helped me in the past.
That's what we were saying. Pat was saying about the ladder. Like triggers. There's triggers, and then we've spoken about this in the past, haven't we? And Glimmers. So Glimmers being. So you could tell a little bit more about that.
The trigger sends you down the ladder,
right?
And the glimmer lifts you up.
Yeah.
So a glimmer would be sort of a moment where everything just feels so much better. Everything just feels so much lighter. It's those moments that give you a bit of a smile. So you go and look for those, and you make sure that you have more of those. So that should the trigger happen, you simply then think of the glimmer, or go searching for the glimmer to try and get you back up the ladder again. I seem to have gone very dark.
I know that. I was just thinking that. Do we look really dark?
Well, you look like you're sort of very well lit, Hannah. Like when you come forward, it's like this sort of beautiful luminescent light on you.
It looks like a halo.
It does. She is an angel, so you know.
So Glimmer might be going for a walk in the
yes,
absolutely.
So it's
the key thing is.
Go on, Pat.
I think the key thing is that a glimmer should always involve some kind of connection with at least one other human being.
Oh, right. Okay.
Because we are designed to be around other people. We are designed to feed off others and for them to feed off us. And if we end up locked away through our anxiety or our depression, and we don't have that contact, we are at risk of dropping even further down. So we need that contact. But again, we need to feel safe in that contact, rather than I've got to go and see people, but I'm petrified. Well, then what's the point? So we need to find a way to know that contact is going to be meaningful and in my interest, and I'm going to feel better for it.
So it might be a phone call, or at the
sometimes it can be a simple thing like a phone call. But you know, we always say, you know, face to face is always better. But we're in a situation now where we can't do face to face. It's very difficult. So if it has to be on a screen or by phone, that is better than not doing it at all.
Yeah, absolutely, totally. And other tips you have for people that are struggling with anxiety? So obviously meeting your emotional needs, 7-Eleven. What else would you say? Because often, Pat, when we were doing our Instagram live, we had a real laugh about this, and we were talking about, you were saying when people actually are so anxious that maybe they're finding 7-Eleven quite difficult to do in the beginning, and you were saying how to engage their logical mind and to say their name backwards.
So I mean, little things like that can be quite funny. You know, spell your name backwards, or spell the street where you live backwards. You know, what about doing your 3 times table, or just pick a random number and start going up in 3s? But anything that is a distraction is the key. Because if we're in that cycle where we can't see anything other than gloom, then we are potentially in a bit of a dark space. So we need to find a way to distract that misuse of the imagination.
And how long do you have to keep distracting yourself for to get yourself out of that place? So until you've got the chance to engage your logical brain. And that can happen sometimes really quickly. For some people it takes a little bit longer and a bit more practice. But you know, I wouldn't say there's a definite time limit on it. The point is, for some people it is about, I've got to learn to distract myself. I've got to practice to distract myself. And once you've mastered that skill, well, that's another achievement you've done. And then you learn to employ it whenever you need it.
think it's also important not to see yourself as a problem person.
Yeah.
You know, that you see yourself. I'm a person that's experiencing anxiety at the moment. This is the anxiety kicking in. It's not me. I'm not the problem. And separating yourself from the problem, maybe giving it a name, or a, you know, a cartoon character or something, you know. And then what you're doing is you're using one of your, you know, our great innate resources that we have is to get into our observing self and, you know, step away from the problem, look down on it.
Because we talk about the 3 Ps, that if we see things as permanent, pervasive and personal, we've misread the situation. So, you know, Lee was saying, you know, I'm from an education background, and you know what happened the last 2 months, where suddenly these kids get told all this work for GCSE and A level, it's a total waste of time, you're not going to do any exams. And the amount of kids came my way totally freaked out by it, because they took it so personally. And when they could stand back and realize, oh, wait a minute, it's not just me, there are thousands of us in the same situation, that did make it a lot easier for them. And you know, the situation we're in at the moment, it's not permanent. Yes, things are going to be different, but it's not permanent. It will change. So it's been able, again, but if we are so caught up in ourselves and in our negative thinking, it does become permanent, personal and pervasive. So we've got to be able to stand back from that and be a bit more objective and see a much healthier truth in it.
I mean, what are the signs to look out for then, to know that somebody is suffering with anxiety, depression, or post-traumatic stress?
I would say if you've got a friend who you suspect might be struggling with depression or anxiety, is to ask them how they're sleeping. And if they say, I'm sleeping a lot, but I'm waking up feeling absolutely exhausted, like I've not had a good night's sleep, then that's such a key thing. Because what happens is when we worry a lot, we stress a lot, and we catastrophize, that puts pressure on our dreaming process. So that extends the dreaming process. And that's really tiring. It takes up lots and lots of brain energy. And so we're not getting that really restorative sleep. So that's why we wake up feeling exhausted. And then that kicks off that cycle of depression that Lee was talking about. You know,
it's one of the first questions I always ask. Tell me about your sleep pattern. It's a really important question.
But somebody might be not wanting to go out with friends. And you or not doing their usual routine. You know, they're not enjoying their usual things they enjoy.
So people can become more introverted.
Loss of appetite.
Just not wanting to engage with anybody. Just losing general interest in everything is a big sign.
And how can you get somebody that's like that to see a professional, or how can you get them to help themselves?
That's tricky. You know, because if somebody's got to go to a professional because they want to go.
Totally.
And because they can see that there's going to be a benefit. And there's no point dragging somebody off who doesn't want to be there. So that can be tricky, but I think it's the more we educate ourselves about what we need to look for in ourselves, we will learn when we need to go and find help somewhere else. We don't know everything.
No.
I don't fix my own car. I'm not the expert, but I know when my car's not functioning properly. So I think the more we learn about ourselves and how we operate as human beings, and the more we learn about what do we need to look out for that is potentially going to harm us emotionally, the easier it becomes for us to then go and find the help that we might need.
I think it's such a crucial part, Pat, because sometimes, I know certainly when I was younger, I'd be running all these different sort of behaviours and programs, if you like, because I didn't know. You know, my mum was very depressed when I was younger, and I learned that as the way she coped is how I would react and cope with things. It's almost like a conditioned response until I understood, actually, I'm right in the 3 Ps. I didn't know what clue what the 3 Ps were or about such deep psychological needs until I unlearned all of that conditioned behaviour and thought, actually, now when I can, you know, be in and out of those different stages you were talking about on the ladder, because I have the awareness and the education to understand. I think that's the big part in having the tools, because no one's life's ever going to be like that. We're like it, but we we want to stop that and just do a bit more of that.
And it's all about balance as well, isn't it, Lee? You know, that we can make those tiny adjustments and they can make a huge difference. It's not making these big, massive steps, but just adjusting just by an increment or two here and there can make a big difference. So if you can get your friends, you know, if you've got a friend and you suspect they're suffering from depression, then to get them to go out for a walk with you or have a nice chat with no pressure or
I think that's a really key thing, actually, about what do you say to someone who is withdrawing. You notice your friend who you've been seeing, and all of a sudden you see them less and they say they're busy and they're withdrawing more and more and more, and then you find out they're struggling. What is the sort of thing you can say to help them come out of themselves and come out and start to reconnect with the things that were once meaningful to them? You know, what would your suggestions be around something like that when you're, you know, talking to friends or anyone who might be struggling?
I think it's keeping in contact, you know, a short phone call every day, every other day, so that you're getting some social connection, that emotional need is being met.
How are you?
And listening, really listening.
Yes. I think that's
not
really
wanting
key.
to sort everything out, but just listening.
Because it is that thing of when someone's heard and seen, and you're not trying to change it necessarily, but you're reflecting back the emotion, the feeling. You get them.
There's that wonderful there's that wonderful cartoon, isn't there, where somebody's just sitting next to somebody with their arm around them. I think, you know, it's just like that, you know, or getting under the duvet with somebody on the sofa. Going, you know, it's okay to feel like this, and it's not unusual. It's not a disease. It's you're not getting your needs met at the moment. That's what's happening. And then you're worrying about it. And you're stressing about it, and that's putting pressure on your sleep. And then you're waking up and you're feeling not motivated, because when we don't sleep well, we don't have any motivation, so we don't want to do the things that we usually do. So it's just taking people gently through.
So if you were to give 3 recommendations, people would be to look at an emotional needs audit.
Yes.
Which you download actually from the Cumin Givens Institute, can't you?
Yes, you can.
That's a really good one to do.
And there are lots of little really nice short little self-help books as well, particularly on anxiety and depression that Cumin Givens publish, and they're really good self-help books, and they're short and easy to read.
And I think I don't know what you think about this, Lis, but just we got a couple of minutes, but one of the important emotional needs that will help someone overcome a challenge more easily is meaning and purpose. If they can assign a greater meaning and purpose to the struggles they're facing, then it can help them rise above those challenges more easily. Would you say that's fair? You know, so it's kind of, you know, that knowing how you can find meaning and purpose. So it's 3 things, isn't it? Being needed, having a belief of something bigger than yourself,
and learning new things.
Absolutely. Amazing. Lis, have you got any other questions? We've got 2 minutes before
2 minutes left, and I was just wondering, as Hannah also talks about self-confidence, what's your best tip on self-confidence and self-belief, self-esteem?
What's my
like a tip on lasting self-confidence?
Well, it's funny, we've just been talking about learning new things, because if you can learn something new, that immediately will start to build your confidence again, or you can find some newfound confidence. It's one of the best ways of doing that. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. You like learn a new language, or
learn a webinar.
We were all going to do that at the beginning of lockdown, weren't we? Learn a new language, but it doesn't have a small thing, and that just increases your confidence. And to I would say that is one of the best things to do for young people. I mean, I think that's a really good thing to do.
And also is occasionally sitting down with a pen and paper and actually write down, what have I actually achieved? And that doesn't have to be, I've got cracking GCSEs and A-levels and a university degree and a doctorate from Oxford. It doesn't have to be that. You know, your achievements could be that I know my friends know I'm a good listener.
Yeah.
And that's an achievement, that's a skill. And if we must take the time to remind ourselves, what are we good at? What are our resources? What have we achieved? And we've all got resources, achievements, and successes of some degree, some sort. Yeah. We just forget about them sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Reconnect with what's important and make it manageable, make the goals manageable. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So fascinating. Thank you so much for being our first guest.
Sorry about the dark light. I think the sun's gone behind a tree.
Take care. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Bye.
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 Have a lovely evening.